Welcome back to part 3 of Romans 9. If you have not already watched part 1 or 2, please do so first, just because I'm going to be linking a lot of what we discuss here back to those first 2 videos. So do that and then come back and watch this. So in part 2, we saw Paul begin to address potential objections to his main point that God's word had not failed, even though not all of Israel was saved. And this was because only those who had faith would receive salvation. And now as we begin this next section in verse 19, we're going to see Paul continue to address potential objections. He says in verse 19, "You will say to me, why does he still find fault? For who resists his will?" Now we have already read and understood what Paul was trying to communicate to us in the previous sections, but now as we read this response, we may be tempted to adjust what we feel like Paul was saying because of this response. Thinking, okay, so this is how Paul expects people to react, then he must be saying something that would cause people to react this way. And so then I start thinking, what would cause me to react this way? However, generations separate us from its original readers. We have completely different cultures. We have different religious upbringings. How we are going to react to what Paul is saying is going to be completely different than how they would react. Let's look at how Paul actually responds to this and what he has to say. "On the contrary, who are you, O man, who answers back to God? The thing molded will not say to the molder, 'Why did you make me like this?' Will it? Or does not the potter have a right over the clay to make from the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another for common use?" In the context of this chapter here, I'm going to propose that the potter represents God, and then the one lump of clay represents the one nation of Israel. And from that one nation of Israel, God, the potter, has the right to make 2 different types of vessels. So from the nation of Israel, he can make 2 different types of vessels. And I'm going to propose that the vessels for honorable use are those in Israel that God desires to grant mercy. And the vessels for dishonorable use are those in Israel that have not believed, and he has decided to bring this partial hardening over. In the last section, we see that Paul is arguing that God is just in doing this. And in this section, we see that Paul is arguing that God has the right to do this as the potter. Okay, but now we need to understand the nature of the relationship between the potter and the clay. If Paul's saying that the potter has the right to do this to the clay, what does that mean? Well, one place we can look is Jeremiah. But in Jeremiah 18, he better describes what that relationship looks like. How does the potter deal with clay? He says in Jeremiah 18, "Then I went down to the potter's house, and there he was, making something on the wheel. But the vessel that he was making of clay was spoiled in the hand of the potter, so he remade it into another vessel, as it pleased the potter to make. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, 'Can I not, O house of Israel, deal with you as this potter does, declares the Lord? At one moment I might speak concerning a nation, or concerning a kingdom, to uproot, to pull down, or to destroy it. If that nation against which I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent concerning the calamity I plan to bring on it. Or at another moment I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom, to build up or to plant it. If it does evil in my sight by not obeying my voice, then I will think better of the good with which I promise to bless it.'" Well, it's clear here with regards to nations and the nation of Israel that if they are following him in obedience and listening to his voice, he will make them into a vessel which is blessed. But if that nation turns from their faith, he can think better of the good that he once was planning to bless it with. So he could change the vessel that he was making that nation into. So clearly the relationship between the potter and the clay is a very dynamic relationship in which the way the clay responds to God will directly affect the type of vessel that God makes the clay into. This is so easily applied to the confusion at hand in Romans 9. Is God just in not saving all of Israel? Yes, he is, because he can act as a potter acts with clay. Even though Israel was a chosen nation, a special nation, God can choose not to save all of them. And because some have not had faith, he can form them into vessels for dishonor. And for those who do have faith, he can form into vessels for honor. So from one nation, from one lump of clay, he can form 2 different types of vessels. He can choose to save some and not save others. He's kind of going to take a step back now and show us from another perspective what God might be doing through all of this. In Romans 9:22, he says, "What if God, although he was willing to demonstrate his wrath and make his power known, endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction?" So I'm going to propose that the vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, that group of people, are the same group of people that from Israel God formed into vessels for dishonorable use because of their disbelief. Just because we know that those who do not have faith do face eternal condemnation. But here we see the word prepared, vessels of wrath prepared for destruction. So does this indicate something different? Does it mean that they have no choice in the matter? I don't think it does. A group being prepared for something does not mean that the individuals within the group had no choice. So I'm going to make an illustration, and in this illustration, the group is going to be a varsity sports team. And this varsity sports team is being prepared for the best lockers in the locker room and maybe some cool trips to some really big tournaments. Now, all of this was prepared for the varsity team before it even existed. Now, there was 15 girls trying out for this varsity team. Not one of them was guaranteed a spot on the team. So although the varsity team itself had been prepared for the best locker room, these cool trips, none of the individual girls were guaranteed the best lockers or guaranteed to be able to partake in these cool trips. In order to partake in these things, they had to make the varsity team. If they did make the varsity team, then they would partake in all that had been prepared beforehand for the varsity team. So apply that concept to the vessels of wrath prepared for destruction. There's been destruction that is prepared for this group called vessels of wrath. And anyone that continues in unbelief and consequently is a vessel of wrath will partake in the destruction that has been prepared already for that group. So how did God act towards these vessels of wrath, these people that have not had faith? Well, it says that he endured with much patience with them. Historically, he never completely destroyed Israel. And in the present day, he has not immediately destroyed the unbelieving Jews, but he has endured with them. And why has he endured with them? He goes on in the next verse to say why. He says in verse 23, "And he did so to make known the riches of his glory to vessels of mercy, which he prepared beforehand for glory, even us, whom he also called, not from among the Jews only, but also from among the Gentiles." So he has endured with Israel. He brought the Messiah through them and now has used them to extend the gospel to the nations in order to demonstrate the riches of his glory to the vessels of mercy. And who are these vessels of mercy? Those in Israel and those from the other nations that have had faith. Now from verse 25 until the end of the chapter, we're going to see Paul bringing in Old Testament reference over Old Testament reference again and again. He wants to show how the situation now is consistent with everything that God has already said. He is driving home the point that God's word has truly not failed. In verse 25, he says, as he also says in Hosea, "I will call those who are not my people, and her who is not my beloved, my beloved. And it shall be said that in that place where it was said to you, you are not my people, there they shall be called sons of the living God." Now this was said when Israel was largely disobedient, and God was telling them that because of their disobedience, he would not call them his people. They were not his beloved. But he was telling them that one day in that same place in Israel, he would look at them and call them his people. He would call them his beloved. Now this was possibly maybe one of the prophecies that really caused a lot of the confusion that we're seeing here in Romans 9, because God said that he would redeem all of Israel right here, right? God said that one day all of Israel would be redeemed, but not all of Israel has been redeemed, right? That's the premise of this chapter. Not all of Israel has been saved. From their perspective, this prophecy has not been fulfilled. But let's go back to the beginning of this chapter. His first answer to the question as to whether or not God's word has failed because not all of Israel had been saved, his first answer was that not all who have descended from Israel are Israel. Not all of Israel is Israel. He was referring to this Israel of God. Well, not all of the physical Israel is this Israel of God. And he talked about this Israel of God was made up of those who had faith, the children of the promise. And these children of the promise, those who have faith, were true children of God. So maybe we can actually see the fulfillment of this promise, because now God can look at Israel, this Israel that Paul is describing here. God can look at this Israel and say, you are my people. You are my beloved. You are true sons of the Most High God. You are true children of God. He continues in verse 27 with, Isaiah cries out concerning Israel, though the number of the sons of Israel be like the sand of the sea, it is the remnant that will be saved. For the Lord will execute his word on the earth thoroughly and quickly. And just as Isaiah foretold, unless the Lord of Sabbath had left us to a posterity, we would have become like Sodom, and we would have resembled Gomorrah. So he continues here showing how even Isaiah prophesied that only a remnant would be saved, right? That they would have been utterly destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah because of their wickedness, unless God had left them a posterity. And then he continues in verse 30. What shall we say then? That Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness attained righteousness, even the righteousness which is by faith? But Israel, pursuing a law of righteousness, did not arrive at that law. Why? Because they did not pursue it by faith, but as though it were by works. They stumbled over the stumbling stone, just as it was written, Behold, I lay in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, and he who believes in him will not be disappointed. So Paul explicitly states here why not all of Israel is saved, just like we talked about in the very first video. Not all of Israel is saved because they have not approached it by faith. And why have some of the Gentiles attained this righteousness that the Jews themselves were seeking after? Because they had faith. So Paul has brought us full circle. In the beginning, he said that it was the children of the promise that are true children of God. And this is why not all of the Israelites made up the Israel of God and true children of God. And now he's saying not all of the Israelites make up the true children of God because they have not all approached it by faith. We could equate the two. The children of the promise, just like we discovered earlier, are those who have had faith, just like Abraham had faith. So Paul has been making the very same point this entire chapter. God is just in not saving all of Israel, and he is right in not saving all of Israel, because those who turn to God in faith will be saved, as he says in the end here. And he who believes in him will not be disappointed. I know I went through a lot in this last section. In the description below, there is a link to my blog where I have some further support and some more detailed scriptural references to everything that I talked about in this video, as well as the other videos. I'd love to know what you think, your thoughts, your questions. Thanks for listening.